My sister pushed me down the stairs and my family took her side. You won't believe what happened next. My sister shoved me down the stairs at her party, claiming it was just a harmless prank. I ended up in the hospital, and now my parents are threatening to cut me off financially if I press charges. I'm 4 months pregnant, 28 years old, and my husband James and I have been trying to conceive for the past 2 years. There were times when we feared it wouldn't happen, and the wait seemed endless. Then, unexpectedly, we discovered I was pregnant. After everything we've been through, this pregnancy means everything to us. We're overjoyed that we're finally having our first child. We've been especially cautious this time because of my previous miscarriages. We chose to keep the pregnancy a secret until we were absolutely certain everything was going well to protect our emotional well-being. If this pregnancy didn't work out, we didn't want to face the added pain of grieving publicly. My younger sister, Emily, and my parents only found out about the pregnancy last week. I felt strange about keeping it from them, but I needed time to process everything. My family loves to celebrate every milestone, big or small. I truly appreciate that about them, and we've shared many happy memories over the years. However, I've been somewhat distant from family events for the past few months. Pregnancy has been emotionally draining, and I needed time for myself. But last week, Emily received a promotion at work and was so excited. I could tell how much she missed me when she invited me to celebrate. She also wanted me there to share the joy with her, and my parents kept encouraging me to go. They said it would mean a lot to her. Emily had a difficult year before, when her wedding fell apart. Her fiancé cheated on her with one of his co-workers, and he didn't even show up to the ceremony. Instead, one of his friends came to break the news, leaving Emily devastated. It was a public humiliation, and she was heartbroken. After that, she focused intensely on her career to cope with the pain. Her recent promotion was a big turning point for her, and she was eager to celebrate. I agreed to attend her party, despite the lingering discomfort I felt. I didn't want to overshadow her moment by drawing attention to my pregnancy. I decided to hide my baby bump with a long, flowing dress and shapewear, hoping to keep the focus on Emily. I didn't want to distract from her celebration. Everything seemed to be going well when I arrived at the party. No one seemed to suspect I was pregnant, and I felt a little more at ease. When my mom noticed I looked a little fuller than usual, I quickly joked that I'd just been eating a lot lately. I was relieved that they didn't suspect anything, and assumed I was just gaining weight. As the night wore on, I became increasingly uncomfortable. The party seemed endless, and I'm not used to staying up late anymore. James, my husband, had arrived straight from work and was enjoying himself, but he kept checking in with me to make sure I was okay. Meanwhile, Emily and the rest of the family were having fun, dancing and drinking. Seeing Emily so happy, especially after everything she'd been through, made me feel good. However, I started feeling nauseous, probably from the heat and the greasy food. I decided to step inside and rest on the couch, hoping to escape the noise and the dancing. All I wanted was to go home, put my feet up, and relax in bed with my Kindle. I closed my eyes for a moment to rest, but my Aunt Mia sat beside me and woke me up. I had dozed off without realizing it. She offered me a glass of wine, but I shook my head without giving a reason. Then she said I looked pregnant, and that my face had been glowing all evening. I froze, unsure how to respond. Aunt Mia is sharp, so I tried to brush it off, avoiding eye contact. She asked me directly, "Are you really pregnant?" Her eyes widened with surprise. I panicked internally but tried to stay calm. I shook my head in an attempt to deflect her attention, but she placed her hands on my stomach, and her eyes lit up with certainty. "Oh my God, darling, you are pregnant," she exclaimed, laughing and pulling me into a hug. I was taken aback and nearly begged Aunt Mia not to say anything just yet, as I didn't think it was the right moment to announce my pregnancy. But she brushed off my concerns, reminding me that everyone had been eagerly waiting for this news, and that the family deserved to hear it. With a warm smile, she cupped my face in her hands and reassured me that tonight was about family. Even though I tried to tell her it was Emily's night, Aunt Mia insisted I wasn't overthinking it and that the celebration was the perfect opportunity to share the good news. Before I could stop her, Aunt Mia stood up and went outside, full of excitement. My heart sank as I saw her take center stage, capturing everyone's attention effortlessly. With no hesitation, she pointed at me and announced, "I have some big news. She's pregnant." There was a brief moment of silence as everyone absorbed her words. Then the room erupted. My relatives rushed over to congratulate me, showering me with hugs, cheers, and tears of joy. They were beyond thrilled, especially knowing the struggles I'd faced with previous miscarriages. My parents were overwhelmed with emotion, crying with happiness for this new chapter in our lives. They even congratulated James, embracing him as well. This was not how I had envisioned revealing my pregnancy. I had hoped for something more private, a quiet moment to share when I was ready, not at a celebration meant for Emily. Instead, I found myself thrust into the spotlight. Across the room, I noticed Emily standing off to the side, smiling as best she could but clearly uncomfortable. She wasn't engaging with anyone and avoided eye contact with me. A wave of guilt washed over me, as I had worked so hard to avoid situations like this. I went over to her and apologized for Aunt Mia's premature announcement. Emily took a deep breath and asked why I hadn't shared the news sooner. I explained that I had planned to announce it a few weeks later, when I felt more comfortable and prepared. Emily pursed her lips, shook her head, and muttered, "Whatever, I guess your wish was granted." Her words stung, and I was caught off guard by her reaction. I tried to reason with her, but she wasn't interested in talking. She took a sip of her wine and distanced herself from me, her attention elsewhere. The rest of the evening was filled with unsolicited advice from family and friends about being a first-time parent. Meanwhile, Emily continued to stare at me from across the room, her gaze full of resentment as if I had somehow wronged her. Her reaction only deepened my feelings of guilt and discomfort. I felt an overwhelming need to step away and clear my head, so I excused myself to the bathroom. The guest bathroom was occupied, so I headed upstairs to use the one in the main bedroom. My bladder felt like it was about to burst. After I finished, I opened the door to find Emily standing there, clearly a bit tipsy. Sensing the tension between us, I tried to apologize again with an awkward smile, but Emily's expression remained cold. Without softening, she rolled her eyes and sneered. "Are you really pregnant?" Her voice held suspicion and a touch of disdain. "Of course I am," I replied, touching my belly instinctively. "Why would I lie about something like this?" I went on, explaining how strange it felt, especially since I hadn't even told our mother, who I talked to every day. My frustration grew as I tried to justify my decision to keep it a secret. But then, in the most callous tone, Emily said, "Maybe this pregnancy will end like the others, with a miscarriage." I was horrified. How could she be so cruel about my child? I snapped, my voice trembling with fury and pain. "How dare you say something like that? I've apologized to you all night, but your comments are completely out of line." My words echoed with frustration. Emily's response was one of anger as she said, "I'm just upset you took away the attention, especially after everything I went through last year." I tried to remind Emily of the support I had given her during her tough times, staying at her house for nights and helping her cope with her fiancé's abandonment. I assured her that I would never intentionally overshadow her, and if she was upset, it was Aunt Mia who should bear the blame for revealing my pregnancy without my consent. But Emily refused to listen, continuing to point the finger at me. Exhausted and frustrated, I decided it was best to step away, hoping that things would calm down so we could talk later. I needed some space to clear my head. As I made my way to the stairs, Emily, who had followed closely behind me, began calling me selfish and accusing me of stealing her moment. I chose to ignore her. But just as I reached the stairs, I felt a hard shove. My body lurched forward as I struggled to regain my balance. In a desperate attempt to stop myself from falling, I grabbed the railing. But my legs gave way under me. I tumbled down the steps, head first, my mind racing as I tried to protect my baby. I instinctively wrapped my arms around my belly, hoping to shield it from the impact. My wrist bore the brunt of the fall, the pain exploding through my body in a rush. It was excruciating. As I lay sprawled on the stairs, I screamed in agony, my wrist throbbing uncontrollably. My thoughts immediately went to my baby. Was he okay? Was he hurt? My vision blurred, but I could hear the frantic voices of my family rushing toward me. Chaos erupted around me as they tried to figure out what had happened. James was the first to reach me, lifting me up and carrying me downstairs. In the midst of my pain, I kept repeating that Emily had pushed me. Everyone looked at her in shock. She stood silently behind me, a guilty expression on her face. James, furious, confronted her, shouting that she had pushed a pregnant woman down the stairs. My mother, equally stunned, rushed over to Emily, shaking her and demanding to know if she had really shoved me. Emily cried, nodding in acknowledgement, her face flushed with shame. My mother looked devastated, her heart breaking at the realization. Emily began to cry uncontrollably as she clung to my mother, telling her that she had been drunk and hadn't meant to do it. But I was in so much pain that I could barely focus on her words. My head was spinning, and I could feel myself slipping in and out of consciousness. I could hear James urgently calling for an ambulance as my surroundings became a blur of voices and sirens. The next thing I remember was waking up in a hospital room. James, exhausted, was asleep in a chair beside me. My throat was dry, and I gently woke him up, asking for some water. As he helped me drink, I asked him what had happened after I passed out. He explained how the fall had caused me to lose consciousness, and I had to be rushed to the hospital for emergency treatment. I had suffered fractures in my wrist and would need to wear a cast for the next 4 to 6 weeks while it healed. I was relieved when James told me that the doctors had checked on the baby and confirmed he was fine. The tension in my chest eased, and I felt a weight lift off me, knowing that my son was safe. James then told me what had happened after the fall. Emily's family had been so furious with her that they had tried to have her arrested. But the police could only take witness statements since I had been unconscious. They still needed my formal statement before any charges could be filed. James grasped my hands and told me that I needed to report Emily's actions, despite my feelings for her. He was firm, insisting that there was no excuse for her to push me down the stairs, especially in my condition. I was still reeling from the shock of it all and couldn't fathom how my own sister could do something so harmful. My wrist throbbed, but the emotional pain of knowing what Emily had done was almost unbearable. "I need to talk to her first," I told James. "I need to understand why she did this, at least to get an explanation or an apology. I can't move forward until I speak with her." James gave me his phone and dialed her number. I took a deep breath before speaking to Emily. I asked her, point blank, why she had done it. Emily's response was a long sigh, followed by bitterness in her voice. She said, "Honestly, I'm just so tired of you always being the center of attention in this family. You have a husband, you're pregnant, you get everything in your life. But last night was supposed to be my night, and as always, you had to steal the spotlight with your pregnancy announcement." After a brief silence, she added defensively, "And the pushing? That was just a prank. I didn't even believe you were really pregnant at first." I never intended for it to escalate to this point, but Emily's words hit me hard. It was beyond comprehension that she would put my life at risk, shoving me down the stairs simply because she couldn't trust me. Before I could process it all, Emily added, "I've been through so much with my failed engagement, and for you to show up and flaunt your happiness in my face was just too much. Next time, maybe you'll think twice before stealing my spotlight again." Her response left me stunned. She was shifting the blame entirely onto me and showing no remorse whatsoever. Not a single apology had come from her. Emily passed the phone to my mother, who had been listening in, and she asked how I was doing. I hadn't realized my sister and my parents were still there. I told her about the wrist fracture, but reassured her that both my baby and I were doing okay. Later, my mom told me that she, Dad, and Emily had stayed at Emily's house all night, worried about me. I couldn't hide my irritation and retorted that if they were really that concerned, they should have waited at the hospital, not at my sister's place. My mother went on to explain that she and Dad had been talking with Emily, who had been upset since the night before. Despite what everyone else was telling me, she pleaded with me not to report my sister, claiming that it was just a silly, drunken mistake. I was taken aback by her request. Trying to understand, I asked, "Why are you defending Emily when she hasn't even apologized?" My mother sighed heavily and explained that Emily had been crying nonstop, feeling humiliated in front of everyone. She said that I had made her feel ashamed. I reminded her that the real issue was that Emily had pushed me down the stairs, not her feelings of embarrassment. My mother insisted that family is family and that sisters sometimes have disagreements. She acknowledged that Emily had never done anything like this before, but she believed that didn't excuse what happened. My mother argued that a broken wrist wasn't worth making a police report over, and promised to work with Dad to ensure something like this wouldn't happen again. Frustration bubbled up inside me, and I firmly told her that I had been uncertain about what to do before calling, but after speaking with Emily, I had made up my mind. A lesson needed to be taught. My mother, now growing desperate, begged me to reconsider pressing charges. Warning that it could ruin Emily's career, I told her that I couldn't care less about that right now. In a last-ditch attempt, my mother threatened to disinherit me if I followed through, claiming it would have lifelong consequences for Emily and create a permanent record. I was shocked by the severity of her threat, but I stood my ground. I made it clear that I was pursuing charges against my sister. Despite my turmoil over possibly ruining her life, I couldn't let her get away with what she had done. Update 1. I wanted to share that my sister was eventually arrested. Despite the continuous calls from my parents, James and I have turned off our phones. James is furious that my parents seem to be siding with Emily. In the meantime, his family and other relatives have reached out to offer their support. Everyone agrees that charging my sister was the right thing to do. Now, my main concern is my baby's safety. After reading some of the comments, I'm even more worried that Emily could endanger my child in the future. If she was capable of shoving me down the stairs, who knows what she might do next? I plan on getting a restraining order to keep her away from me and my family for good. Update 2. Hey, everyone, my sister, who was previously accused of assault, has been sentenced. Since I last posted, my parents hired a skilled lawyer for her, and they made a solid argument. She was placed on probation, given that it was her first offense. The judge ordered her to pay for my medical bills, undergo 6 months of therapy, and meet regularly with a probation officer. My parents are still angry with me, but too afraid to talk to me directly. They are upset that I didn't protect Emily from the legal consequences. They continue to insist that her mental health issues were behind her actions, but the rest of the family doesn't see that as an excuse. My parents have been criticized by both my side and James's family for defending Emily. Despite their pleas, no one believes her emotional state justifies what she did. I'm hoping they'll take her to see a doctor so she can get the help she needs. I've applied for a restraining order after the sentencing, ensuring that Emily won't be able to come near me or my family again. I don't know how to answer people who ask if Emily was always kind to me growing up, or if I missed signs of her resentment. Since we finally disagreed about something, civility seems to be a problem. Sure, we had our sibling fights, but I never thought it would escalate to something like this. I've always loved her deeply, and this betrayal is something I never saw coming. It's painful to realize that the people closest to us can be the ones who hurt us the most. Update 3. It's been 5 months since I last posted. Neither James nor I have had contact with Emily or my parents. I gave birth to my baby 5 days ago, and we've been focused on giving him the best care possible. Last night, just as we were about to sit down for dinner, I heard a knock on the door. To my surprise, it was my mother standing on the porch. When I opened the door, I was completely caught off guard. I had no expectation of seeing her there. I cautiously asked, "What are you doing here?" My husband, equally stunned, moved quickly to stand by my side, positioning himself in front of me as a protective barrier. My mother, however, immediately started crying, claiming she'd just had to come over to meet the baby after hearing from some relatives that I had given birth. Given everything that had happened recently between us, her enthusiasm felt completely out of place. She went on, expressing how thrilled she and my father were to finally be grandparents. She then mentioned that my father would be coming soon, bringing wine and baby gifts for us to celebrate together as a family. James and I exchanged a look of disbelief. Was my mother seriously acting as though nothing had occurred over the past few months? Here she was, standing on my porch, as if everything had been forgotten simply because I had a baby, like we were supposed to have a joyful family reunion. In the calmest tone I could muster, I reminded her that we hadn't spoken in 5 months because she had chosen to side with Emily instead of me. Yet, here she was, pretending everything was fine. James, stepping forward, made it clear to her that the moment she failed to act like a decent mother to me, she lost her right to be a grandmother. He added that if Emily weren't my sister, he would have physically confronted her for her cruelty. But instead she had protected Emily, the one who had treated me horribly because of her role as a mother. I could see my mother's expression change, shifting from feigned joy to anger. She tried to counter by claiming that these were old issues, things that had happened in the past, and that she had done what was necessary. She insisted we couldn't just cut her and my father out of our child's life. She pointed out how unfair it was that we wouldn't let her see her grandchild. But James stood firm, telling her that we were the ones who decided who would be a part of our son's life. Having her in our lives made both of us uncomfortable. My mother tried to justify her actions by saying that Emily was dealing with depression. I shook my head, exasperated, as she went on defending Emily, saying that Emily was remorseful and trying to make amends. She promised that once my son was born, we could all move past the past and be one big happy family again. I scoffed and made it clear that I didn't want that. My mother believed she could simply disregard everything and return to how things were, but that was no longer possible. Things had changed, and there was no going back. I asked her to leave because I couldn't stand any more of it. I wasn't going to let her ruin my mood on such an important day. Just then my father drove up the driveway, carrying a basket of presents and a large teddy bear. I was too exhausted to argue any further, but I was appalled by their audacity to show up unannounced. Thankfully, James stepped in and told me to go inside and rest. He promised to handle the situation. Reluctantly, I agreed. As I made my way inside, I could still hear their voices through the door. James's refusal to let them inside quickly escalated things. My dad, insisting that he had every right to see me and the baby because he was family, argued with James. My normally calm husband lost his temper. He threatened to call the police if they didn't leave immediately. Of course, my dad continued to argue, even insisting on leaving the baby gifts behind, as though that would somehow make up for everything. James, however, made it clear we would not accept their gifts. He told them that we did not want them in our lives anymore, and that we would be filing a restraining order to ensure they couldn't approach us again. His words had a profound effect on my parents. After everything, especially with a baby now in the picture, I think they believed they could simply re-enter our lives without consequence. I was proud of how James handled it. After today's events, James and I have decided to install cameras throughout the house for safety. I have no desire to ever see my parents again. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and click the notification bell to stay updated on more real-life stories that are happening around you.